Imagine your community coming together, voting to invest in something really vital, the future of its kids.
Yeah, a big school bond measure.
Exactly. Promising, like upgraded classrooms, new labs, all the essential stuff for learning. That's the hope, anyway.
That's always the hope, yes.
Well, today we're taking a deep dive into a situation where that hope might be turning into something, well, a bit surprising and concerning for some folks.
Okay.
Our focus is the Hayward Unified School District, HUSD, and their Measure I. This was a huge bond, $550 million, approved back in March 2024.
A massive amount of money, $500 million.
Right. And the sources we're looking at, especially this one article from the Town Hall News, it's titled, HUSD's $550 million bond boondoggle. How Measure I became a gravy train for contractors while schools crumble. That came out in June 2025.
Wow, okay. That title doesn't mince words.
No, it really doesn't. It paints a pretty vivid picture of how that $500 million is reportedly being spent. So our mission today, basically, is to unpack the specifics of USD spending. We want to understand what this article calls the gravy train for contractors and consultants and figure out what it means for students and, for you, the taxpayers, footing the bill.
Get a complete understanding of what's alleged to be happening.
Exactly. So you can see the whole picture. Let's get into it.
So what's really striking right off the bat is how quickly things started moving.
Yeah.
USD issued the first $60 million in April 2025. That's barely a year after the voters said yes.
Okay, so pretty fast. You'd think that money would go straight to those urgent needs, right? The classrooms, the facilities they campaigned on.
That's what you'd normally expect, yeah. But this article suggests, well, a different initial path for the money.
Oh.
It argues the funds started flowing almost immediately towards consultant contracts and administrative overhead, not directly to those physical school needs.
So overhead first. Any specific examples?
Yeah, the article points to one, $18,034 paid to a company called Placeworks, just for CEQO consultant services on, a single property.
Okay, CEQA, that's the environmental review, right?
Ugh.
California Environmental Quality Act.
Yeah.
Standard stuff, but still.
Standard, but it can be pricey. And the author's point here is basically that this initial money spent on what looks like admin process could have purchased classroom supplies for dozens of schools.
So right away, a potential question about priorities, according to this source.
Exactly. Kind of setting the stage for a potential misdirection from the start.
Okay, so if that raises some eyebrows, it gets even more interesting when we look at procurement, basic bidding processes.
Right. The article claims Hadan had real trouble managing simple bidding. It gives this frankly eye-opening example.
Which one?
The district's CalShape ventilation program, this was for 5 schools, they put out a formal bid request and got 0 responses.
0. Not one company bid.
Not one, according to the article. And it connects this to a bigger issue. It suggests USD's reputation for, well, mismanagement is maybe so well known in the construction industry that contractors won't even bid on their projects.
Wow. If that's true, that basically removes any competitive pressure, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. And the article says, because of this, HUSD had to negotiate directly with one company, Mesa Energy Systems.
How much?
For $721,560, almost $750,000 for work that ideally should have been competitively bid.
So nearly $750K, potentially without getting the best possible price because nobody else even wanted to bid.
That's the implication, that the lack of competition could be costing taxpayers more. It really highlights a potential challenge in how the district interacts with, the construction market.
Yeah, how its reputation might be directly hitting the bottom line.
Precisely.
And speaking of ongoing costs, the article then talks about what it calls the contractor gravy train.
Right. This is about allegations that HUSD keeps sending taxpayer money to the same contractors year after year for what the article describes as just routine maintenance.
Routine stuff? Like what?
Well, it lists several examples of these, like annual commitments. RQI Inc. gets $74,000 for door and frame maintenance.
74 grand for doors.
SOPS Electric, another $74,000 for electrical services. Pump Pros gets $60,000 for pump maintenance.
Okay, these are adding up.
And then there's Vision and Viewpoint Glass. They get $150,000 annually. With options for 5 years, that totals $750,000 just for glass.
A $750,000 potential commitment for glass maintenance over 5 years.
So the article's asking a pretty pointed question here, then.
It is. Basically, if these are just routine maintenance contracts, why do you need a $550 million bond for infrastructure upgrades if the basic upkeep, the everyday stuff, is constantly being outsourced?
Instead of being handled by, like, an internal facilities team? Exactly. Instead of what the article calls a competent facilities department. It makes you wonder about the district's whole strategy for taking care of its buildings long term.
It really does. And the insight here from the source seems to be that taxpayers are potentially paying twice, right? Big bonds for the big projects.
And also annual assessments for ongoing maintenance, which we'll get to.
Right. And these expensive external contracts for basic stuff.
Yeah, it points towards maybe a systemic issue in how resources are being used, maybe a lack of internal capacity to handle things efficiently.
Okay, so beyond the routine stuff, what about the actual projects? The article mentions change orders.
Oh, yes, the change orders. The article uses these to illustrate what it calls HUSD's project management incompetence. Basically, costs going up after the contract is already signed.
Are the examples significant?
Well, individually, maybe not astronomical. Like Andy's roofing company at one middle school, the original contract was about $1.68 million. The final cost went up by almost $3,000.
Okay, about $3,000 on a $1.7 million job.
Right. And another one, Bueller Commercial Construction for an early education expansion. Original contract, around $2.43 million. It went up by a bit over $2,200.
Again, seems relatively small compared to the total.
It does, but the source argues it's not about the individual amount so much as the pattern. It sees it as evidence of poor planning and scope management.
Ah, so the concern is, if this happens on smaller stuff, what happens on the really big, complex projects funded by Measure I? Could these small overruns become huge ones?
That's exactly the worry highlighted in the article, that it's a red flag for potential systemic issues in managing projects regardless of scale, a warning sign, really.
Okay, so we've got concerns about initial spending, procurement, routine maintenance contracts, and project change orders. What else?
Well, the article then broadens the view to what it calls the consultant industrial complex.
Sounds dramatic.
It does. The argument is that HUSD is feeding this ever-growing consultant ecosystem instead of building up its own internal expertise.
So, relying too much on outside experts.
That's the claim. It gives an example. United Inspections getting $6,000 for DSA inspector services just for a cell tower modification.
DSA.
Yeah.
Division of the State Architect. School Construction Safety Oversight.
Correct. And what's really interesting is the sheer range of consulting mentioned. The article also points to the district approving a whole pool of pre-qualified moving and associated services consultants.
A pool, like a pre-approved list of companies.
Exactly. Includes several big names. JLZ Moving, Managed Facility Solutions, LEA Relocation Services, Anchor Relocation, Coravon Chipman Relocation.
And what's the concern with having a pre-approved list? Doesn't that streamline things?
It can, but the author argues this setup allows administrators to, and I quote, cherry-pick contractors without public scrutiny.
Ah, so less transparency, potentially leading to
favoritism and inflated costs, according to the article. It adds another layer of worry about whether the district is getting the best value through fair, open competition.
It definitely raises questions about how those lists are used, doesn't it? Is it really about efficiency, or could it open the door to, well, less competitive deals?
That's the core question the article poses.
Okay, now you mentioned earlier something about paying twice. The article calls it the Maintenance Assessment Double Dip.
Yes. This relates to something called the Maintenance Assessment District, or MAD. Basically, property owners in Hayward pay an extra assessment every year.
How much?
It's $28 per year. And that generates about $1.37 million, specifically earmarked for maintaining and improving school grounds.
Okay, so over $1 million a year just for grounds maintenance separate from the bond.
Correct. And this leads to the article's critical point. If taxpayers are already paying through the huge Measure I bond and also paying this annual MAD assessment for maintenance, why are those massive external contractor agreements still needed for basic upkeep?
Yeah, that does sound like a potential overlap, doesn't it? Where's all the maintenance money actually going if you need bonds, assessments, and these big contracts?
It strongly suggests, at least according to the source, a duplication of funding or, at minimum, inefficient use of those dedicated maintenance funds.
And then, almost ironically, HUSD announced some savings recently.
Ah, yes. They announced $4.7 million in taxpayer savings from refinancing some older bonds. getting a lower interest rate, basically.
Which sounds good on the surface.
It does. But the article uses this really sharp analogy. It says it's like bragging about switching to a lower interest credit card while maxing out the spending limit.
Ouch. So the point is...
The point is that these refinancing savings, while real, mean nothing when the district wastes millions on consultant fees, change orders, and no-bid contracts. The article basically frames it as a distraction.
A distraction from bigger, ongoing financial problems or inefficiencies that cost taxpayers way more than the refinancing saves.
That's the argument, yeah. It puts those savings in a much different context.
And the alleged inefficiency doesn't stop there, does it? There's also deferred maintenance.
Right. The article calls it the deferred maintenance disaster. It cites one specific example: over $22,600 paid to Diablo Boiler and Steam for emergency repair.
Emergency repairs.
Repairs, the article claims, could have been prevented with, proper, regular upkeep.
So saving money in the short term by skipping maintenance, only to pay more later for an emergency fix.
Exactly. The classic penny-wise, pound-foolish approach, as the article puts it.
And this is happening while the administrative side is growing.
That's another point the article makes, what it calls the administrative overhead explosion. It describes in expanding facilities, department directors, managers, coordinators are mentioned.
So more managers.
Well, according to the article, basic maintenance is still being outsourced to those expensive contractors we talked about earlier.
So you end up with, as the article says, the worst of both worlds.
Yeah. High administrative overhead plus expensive contractor fees. It really makes you question the overall structure and strategy for managing the district's buildings. Are they building internal capacity or just adding layers to manage outsiders?
A really critical question about resource allocation. And that brings us to accountability, I guess. How is all this spending being overseen?
Well, according to the article, maybe not closely enough, it's pretty blunt, actually. It alleges the HUSD board treats these huge facilities spending items as just routine consent items.
Consent items, meaning they're bundled together and approved all at once with little or no discussion.
That's generally how consent calendars work, yes. The article highlights one meeting in June 2025 where over $200,000 in facilities contracts were reportedly approved this way. Basically rubber stamped, the source implies.
$200,000 approved with minimal public discussion.
The article calls this approach an accountability black hole, and it draws a stark contrast between this, apparent lack of scrutiny.
And what the bond measure actually promised voters.
Exactly. The bond language was all about upgrading aging classrooms and labs, funding career training facilities, improving learning technology, art and music classrooms, athletic fields.
Plus crucial safety things like earthquake and fire safety, emergency communications, school security, accessibility for disabled students, basic systems like plumbing, electrical, and HVAC.
All that core stuff voters likely expected. But the article alleges the actual spending is heavily weighted towards consultant fees, administrative overhead, and contractor markups.
Not those direct improvements. It's a really stark picture.
Yeah.
Promises versus reported reality.
It is. And the source tries to give some perspective by claiming that other California school districts successfully manage facilities without what it calls the consultant dependency and procurement failures plaguing HUSD.
So the argument isn't that it's impossible, or that California rules make it this way.
No. The article explicitly suggests the difference comes down to management competence and accountability. It frames HUSD's situation as potentially avoidable, not inevitable. Which is, a red flag for how public money might be handled anywhere if oversight isn't strong.
Definitely food for thought for listeners everywhere. So, given all these allegations, what does the article suggest should happen? What should taxpayers demand?
The author lays out 6 specific demands, actions they believe taxpayers should push for before any more Measure I money gets spent.
Okay, what's the first one?
Number 1, an independent audit of all bond spending so far. Get a clear outside look at the books.
Makes sense. Second.
Competitive bidding requirements for all contracts over $25,000. No more negotiating huge deals without competition, essentially.
Okay. Promoting fair pricing. What's third?
Eliminate the dependency on consultants for routine facilities management. Build that expertise internally instead.
Right. Tackle that consultant industrial complex idea head on. Fourth.
Public reporting of all change orders and cost overruns. Bring any deviation from the plan out into the open. Transparency.
Crucial for accountability. Fifth.
Performance metrics for both facility staff and contractors. You need to be able to measure if the work is actually effective and efficient.
See if you're getting what you paid for. And the last one.
Number 6. Quarterly public meetings dedicated only to bond project updates. Regular, focused oversight and community engagement.
So a clear set of proposed actions focused on transparency, competition, internal capacity, and oversight.
Exactly.
Okay, so wrapping this deep dive up,
Mhm.
what's the ultimate picture painted by this town hall news article?
Well, fundamentally, it alleges that Hayward Unified's massive $550 million Measure I bond, which was meant for critical school upgrades, has instead become, in the article's very strong terms, a feeding trough for contractors and consultants.
And this is reportedly due to what?
Systematic mismanagement, a lack of effective oversight, procurement failures, over-reliance on outsiders. Leading, the article argues, to minimal real value for the students and for you, the taxpayers who approved the bond.
Wow.
And the article concludes with a really powerful thought. It says the real infrastructure crisis at HUSD isn't just the old buildings. It's failed leadership that treats taxpayer money as an endless resource for consultant contracts and administrative overhead. It argues students deserve better, taxpayers deserve better, and HUSD's current approach, according to this source, delivers neither.
A very strong conclusion. It certainly makes you stop and think, doesn't it? But what these kinds of allegations, if true, could mean for how public funds are managed. Maybe even in your own community.
Absolutely. The need for vigilant, ongoing oversight of public spending, especially massive bond measures like this, is just critical.
Definitely something for all of us to keep in mind.